Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Eugene and this channel is dedicated to teaching of programming and software development. In the previous lesson, we learned about basic arithmetic operators like plus, we learned about unary operators like plus plus, as well as operator precedence. This is the sixth Programming Fundamentals lesson, and in this lesson we are going to learn about relational operators and conditions, while in the end we are going to do a small exercise. First, let's understand what relational operators and conditions are. When we are writing programs, very often we need to compare between different values. For example, we may want to check if a student's grade is higher than 90, or in contrary check if it is lower than something. To make this comparison, we use relational operators like greater than in the first example, and then use a condition to run some code based on the comparison's result. For example, we can decide that if a student has a grade higher than 95, he gets a certificate of excellence. Now, there are different relational operators. What's important to understand is that every relational operator returns a Boolean value. This means that no matter what type of comparisons we do, the result of the comparison will be true or false. We have 6 relational operators. The first one checks if a value equals to another value. Pay attention that this doesn't have to be a number. This can be a char or a string or any other type that can be compared. The second one is just the opposite of equals to. Then we have 4 comparison operators that check if a value is bigger than the other value, smaller than the other value, greater than or equals to the other value, and the last one is less than or equals to the other value. Again, for every operator, the result will be always true or false. Now, sometimes we need to make decisions during the execution of our program, and based on the decision, we should execute some code. In order to make a decision which code to run, we have a special command named if, which runs a block of code if its condition is evaluated to true. The if command contains the if keyword and then the condition in parentheses. After the if command with the condition, we have curly braces. Everything between the opening and closing braces is considered a block, and all of it will run if the condition is evaluated to true. Now, if we have only one command after the if statement, we can just type the command without curly braces. But only this command will run if the condition is evaluated to true. All following commands are not part of the block. Now, what if we want to do different things based on the condition result? For example, print passed if the grade is higher than or equals to 55, and print failed if the grade is lower than 55. To do this, an if command has a continuation named else. In this case, if the condition is evaluated to true, the first block will run, but if the condition is evaluated to false, the else block will run. Just like with the first part of the if the else block has a single command, it can be written directly after the else keyword without curly braces. Now, sometimes we may want to have a condition that will run in case the previous condition was evaluated to false. For example, we want to check if a student has a grade higher than 95, or if it's not higher than 95, then we want to check if it's higher than 55, or if it's 55 or less. In this case, we can use the if statement, and in the else, instead of adding a block of code, we immediately add another if statement. So the first if statement is running, and if the condition is evaluated to false, the program continues to the else. But then we immediately get into another if statement that checks the second condition. In this example, we first check if the grade is higher than 95, and if it's not, we check if it's higher than 55. And again, if it's not higher than 55, then we get into the last else statement. Sometimes we need to combine multiple conditions in a single statement. In order to combine conditions, we use logical operators. For example, we want to check if the grade is higher than 55 but lower than 95. To do this, we can use the AND logical operator, which is written using two ampersands. In this case, only if both conditions are evaluated to true, the whole if will be evaluated to true. When it's enough for one part of the condition to be true, we can use OR using two pipes. In this case, the if will be evaluated to true if at least one condition is true. In addition, we have the negation operator, or NOT, which is written using an exclamation mark. In this case, the inner condition is evaluated and then the if will be true if the condition is evaluated to false. Pay attention that we use parentheses to use not on the result of grade higher than 55. Now, a few words about short circuit evaluation. When you have two conditions or more in a single if statement, the conditions are evaluated one by one. Now, if we have an AND between the two conditions and the first condition is evaluated to false, it doesn't matter what will be the result of the second one. The final result will be false since we need both conditions to be true to get a true in the end. So C# will not even evaluate the second condition to save some time, which is a performance optimization. The same works with OR, but in this case, if the first condition is evaluated to true, the second one won't be even evaluated because it's enough that one of the conditions is true. So C# won't waste time on the evaluation of the second condition. Now let's go to VS Code to see some examples and do an exercise. Alright, now we are in VS Code. I already created a console app in order to show a few examples, and later in the end we will do an exercise. So to begin with, let's start by trying some simple conditions. So let's declare a variable named grade, which will be assigned with, for example, 85. Now let's define a boolean that will be assigned with the following. It will be true if grade is higher than 55. Now, first let's print the value of past. Okay, let's run it and then we'll see what's happening. Okay, as you can see, the result is true. Now, what we just did, we've written a condition which is grade is higher than 55, and the result of this condition, which is true or false, as we already said, is assigned to the variable past. And then we just print the value of the variable. Now, if the grade was, for example, 45, then the result would be, of course, false, as you can see. Now, as we already said, we can use a condition inside an if statement. So, for example, we can do the following. If passed, which is a Boolean, console write line passed. Now let's change this back to 85 and run this. All right, now as you can see, the condition is true, and because it's true, we entered this block of code. Now, usually what we do is, instead of first assigning a condition to a variable, we usually just type the condition inside the if, and this is how you will see it most of the times. So in this case, what we are doing, we just say if grade is higher than 55, then console write line passed. And if we run this, you'll see that the result is exactly the same. Now, as we already learned, we can add another block named else in case the condition is evaluated to false. So we can add an else here. And in this case, we can just print failed. So now if I run this, you will see that since grade is actually higher than 55, we are going to get into this block. And you can see that only passed is print, but if the grade will be 45, you will see that instead of running this block, the block of the else will be executed. So now you can see that because grade is not higher than 55, we are getting here and failed is printed, as you can see. Now, as you remember, we can combine multiple conditions into a single if statement. For example, let's remove this else, and now we can say if grade is higher than 55 and grade is lower than 90. And then we'll print passed. Now, as we already learned, we need both conditions to be evaluated to true in this case. Otherwise, we are not going to get into this if statement. Now, in this case, grade equals to 45. Now, if we check the conditions, we'll see that the first condition is already evaluated to false. And even though the second one is evaluated to true because 45 is lower than 90, the whole if statement will be evaluated to false. I mean, the whole condition will be evaluated to false, so we are not going to get into this block of the if. All right, now let's run this. And as you can see, passed is indeed not printed. Now, if we change this to 85, we'll see that it's both higher than 55 and lower than 90. In this case, we are going to get inside the if statement because both conditions are evaluated to true. Now, since we already know how to get input from the user, use operators to do some calculations, and now we learned about operators, let's do a small exercise. So I'll delete everything, and the exercise that we are going to do is actually a simple calculator. We are going to ask the user for the first number, then we will ask him for the operator, And then we are going to ask him for the second number. After doing the calculation, we will print the result. So let's begin with asking the user for the first number. Please type the first number. And now we actually need to get the number from the console. So we'll define an integer variable, number1, console read line. But as you remember, read line returns a string. So we need to convert the result to an integer. To do this, we are going to use the convert class. All right. Now let's see if it works. Please type the first number. For example, let's type 2. All right. Now, let's do the same for the second number. So I'll just copy this. Please type the second number. All right. Number 2. And now we need to ask for the operator. We want to ask the user what he wants to do. Whether he wants to multiply the numbers, to divide them, and so on. So again, between those numbers, let's ask the user for the operator. Please type the operator. And let's give him the options. So we'll begin with plus, minus, multiply, and divide. All right. Now we'll need to get the operator from the user. So let's get it into a string variable. All right. Okay. So now we should have number 1, the operator, and number 2. Now we are going to assume that the user types correct input, which means that he actually writes a number as the first number. The second number is also a number. We are not going to check if it's not a number and return an error or something. So we are going to assume that the input is correct. The same for operator. So we are going to assume that he only types one of these 4 operators. Now, after we get this input, what we need to do is to run some conditions. So for this, first we need to check if the operator equals to plus. Now, before that, if let's define a variable named result. And now what we are going to do, we are going to assign the sum of number 1 and number 2 to result. Now, if the operator is not plus, it might be one of this, minus, multiply, or divide. So we need to continue checking. So we are going to add an else, but in the else we are going to type another if. So it is an else if operator equals to minus. In this case, the result will be number 1 minus number 2. And then again, since it can't be, if it's not plus and it's not minus, it can't be multiply or divide, we need to run another else if OP equals to multiply. And in such case, we are going to multiply the numbers. Now, since the only option left is divide, we can simply add an else, because we already checked all the others, and if it's not one of those, it should be divide. So in this case, we can simply type result equals number 1 divided by number 2. Now, this is possible only because we assume that these are the only symbols that the user can type. We are not checking for the input, if it's correct or not. Now, and in the end, let's just print the result. All right, so what we have here, we are first asking the user for the first number, we are getting it from the console, then we ask him to type the operator, and then we are doing the same for the second number. Then we defined a variable for the result, and based on the conditions, we perform the necessary operation. All right, and then we just print the result. Let's run it and see what happens. Okay, please type the first number. So I'm going to type 3. Please type the operator. Now I'll type an asterisk. And then the second number will be 5. And as you can see, the result is printed and it's correct. In this lesson, we learned about conditions. This is one of the main topics in programming, and it is very important to understand it. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next lesson.